So I want to go a little bit deeper into how I got into racing and some of the tools and techniques that I used. When I first started, I was working at Barnes & Noble and I was going to school. So there was these constraints that I had. I knew that I could only race in certain times of the year and I couldn't blow out the bank. And so I think especially when we're all starting, we all have those constraints, whether we're in school or we have a 9 to 5. And that's okay. We all started there. So not taking that as a negative, but sometimes spinning that into a positive where for me, I knew that I had to focus on a certain time of the year. But that also let me train, right? Everyone else was traveling around and doing all this stuff. And I was able to stay at home and train after I got off work. So that is something to kind of lean into. And I think from the budget side of things as well, picking one race and picking a race that you are going to have fun at. So making sure that it's a track you like. If you want to travel somewhere that you've never been before, that was something that my mom and I did. We went to Platic Hill in New York and stayed in this little tiny hotel that looked like Night at the Roxbury. But those two things, the constraints and the budget, is something to keep in mind. And for me, that journey looked like trying to get my license, my USA Cycling license. So in racing, you'll have your federation license. Each country has its own federation. So I needed to get my USA Cycling Pro license, which means I needed to win 2 Category 1 races, and anyone can sign up to Category 1 in mountain biking. And then once I got my pro license, I could go to the national championships or one of the other 2 races that pays UCI points. And UCI is the federation, the international federation. So the federation does Tour de France and the World Cups and things like that. And once I had enough UCI points, I could go and race my first World Cup. And that was my goal, to go from racing Cat 1 to race my first World Cup. And I talk about those constraints, and I was actually able to, miraculously do that. In 1 year, I went to San Ynez, which was just a couple hours away from me, and I was able to win that. And then I went to Sea Otter Classic, which was a much bigger race, and I was able to win that by just a little bit. And it was actually funny because the guy who got second, he said, "Aren't you a little bit fast to be racing Cat 1?" And I was like, man, if I wouldn't have won, you would have won. So after San Ynez, I went to the Sea Otter Classic, which is one of the bigger races in the US. It's not famous for the difficulty of its downhill track, but it was an amazing experience for me to be able to see a lot of the pros that I had seen in person. I wasn't racing the same class as them, but even still, I was able to get that experience and feel what it felt like to be at a mountain bike race that was, more than just a couple of people. So I was able to win my Cat 1 class, and it was funny being up on the podium because the guy in second, who almost beat me, he was like, man, you're pretty fast. Why are you racing this class? Aren't you a little bit too fast to be racing Cat 1? I was like, if I wouldn't have won, you would have won. So and I don't want to be here. But so that allowed me to get my USA Cycling Pro license. And then from there, it was the summertime. So I was off school. I took some time off of my job at the bookstore, and I went traveling around with my mom. We went to New York and stayed in this place that was Night at the Roxbury, every room was different. I ended up crashing at that race and not scoring points, but after that, I kind of felt some pressure because there was only one more race that paid UCI points, and that was the national championships, and I needed to get a top 20 there. So my dad came with me to the race in Colorado, the national championships, and it was his first race. It was his first mountain bike race. He had been to all these motocross races and stuff like that, but he had never been to a mountain bike race. And I remember walking the track with him, and he was like, well, why don't you just kind of let off the brakes? You go much faster. And I was like, well, yeah, obviously, that is the point, is not to hit the brakes, but it's kind of difficult, Dad. So you're not going to be much help here. That's fine. You can work on my bike if you remember. But it was an amazing experience because I ended up qualifying 5th in the pro class. So that was 5th in the country. And, I was kind of like a nobody. Nobody knew who I was, but I had been practicing for the last couple of years, and this was my time. I had came here to try to get my points. And, I had talked in this course, I've talked about like that risk. And I remember starting off the starting line and having this just incredible run. And at one moment on the jumps, and the jumps were something that I didn't even think about, but I lost focus, ended up crashing on one of the jumps. And like, as soon as I crashed, I tried as hard as I could to like hold it from going over the bars, but I couldn't. And at that moment, I was like, I'm not getting my points. Like, I'm not gonna make it to this World Cup race this year. I pedaled across the line, and I came across the line, and I was like, I didn't do it. Like, I went to my dad, and I was so sad, like I had spent all of this time and all of this savings and all of this energy, and my parents and everyone had put all of this work into it, and ending up finishing like 25th. But, luckily I had read the rule book, like cover to cover, over and over and over again. I was just anything that I could do. And there was a rule where you could petition to go to a World Cup race on the national team. And I went to the commissaire at that race right afterward, and I said, is there any way that I can get on this team? And there was a race in the US, a World Cup race. And he was like, there's a lot of people petitioning, but I don't think you can go there. And I was like, well, what about Italy? And he was like, well, it's next week. And I was like, well, and he was like, yeah, if you want to go, we'll put you on the team. And that was kind of where it started for me. I told the story about going with my mom and my brother to Italy, my first time out of the country, but it all started from those constraints, and that budget of saying these are the small races. I could have done hundreds of races that year, but I picked like 5 races that I could go to, that maybe I could get a ride with friends to, that my mom could support me, or my dad could support me there. And not everyone has that opportunity, but those constraints, that focus allowed me to achieve my dream that year of going and racing a World Cup. And I think that is so kind of important to think about. And even now when I look back on it, if a kid were to say to me, hey, I'm in Cat 1, but I want to race a World Cup at the end of this year, I'd be like, well, just slow down. But I think being in that mode and setting a goal for yourself is incredibly powerful.